Hi, in this video, we'll talk and learn about for loops. There are two types of loops in programming, indefinite loops and definite loops. Today, we'll be focusing on definite loops. These are loops that will repeat a set number of times. A for loop is a control structure that repeats instructions for a fixed number of times. Like Lua, most programming languages include for loops, so you'll be using this tool regularly throughout your programming journey. We'll start the for loop with the keyword for. Then we create a control variable and set its initial value. Traditionally, we name this variable I. Here, we set the value of I to 1. Then we add a comma and the end value. This will tell the for loop how many times to repeat. Lastly, we add the increment. This tells the for loop the value to increase our control variable I by. We add the do and the end keywords. And inside, we add the code that we want to run during each loop. In Lua, the increment value is optional. If it's not included, then Lua just assumes the increment is +1. Let's take a look at an example for loop. Before we get into what this for loop is doing, I want to highlight that we can name the control variable anything we want. Traditionally, we use the variable I. However, we could name it count. We could name it num. The key thing here is that when we use the control variable inside of our loop, it has to match the name in the for loop header. All right, let's walk through this for loop line by line. We start by initializing our control variable and setting its value to I. Then we check the end value and ask, has I passed the ending value? I is 1, so the answer here is no, and we enter the loop. We execute the code inside of the loop and print 1 to the console. Then we end the loop and we increment the control variable. Back in the for loop header, we check the ending condition again. Has I passed the ending value? Well, I is 2 now, so the answer again is no, and we enter the loop. We execute the code inside of the loop and print 2 to the console. We end the loop and head back up to the for loop header, and we increment the control variable by 1. Now I is 3. We check our ending value. Has I passed the ending value? Well, 3 is not past 3, so our answer again is no, and we enter the loop. We execute the code inside the loop and print the value of I to the console, which is 3 now. Then we end this loop and increment the control variable. Now I is 4. We check the ending value again. Has I passed our ending value? Yes, it has. 4 has passed 3, so this time the answer is yes, and we exit the loop. Quick note here, because we were just incrementing by 1, we could have written our for loop without that increment value. One other handy thing about for loops, we can also increment our for loop by values other than 1 by changing the increment value of our for loop header. This for loop will increase the value of I by 2 each time. So when we run this program, we'll have 1, 3, and 5 printed to the console. This for loop will decrease by 1 each time. Notice that we start the initial value of I at 5 and we stop at 1, as opposed to starting at 1 and ending at 5. When we run this loop, we see that we start at 5 and then decrease by 1 until we get down to 1. Last but not least, we can create a variable outside of the for loop and update it within the for loop. This for loop adds numbers 1 through 5. Let's walk through this for loop to see how this works. We start by creating a variable named sum and assign it the initial value of 0. We then move into the for loop where we initialize a control variable named I and assign it the starting value of 1. Then we loop. We add the value of sum, which is 0, to the value of I, which is 1. And then assign this value 1 to the variable sum. We then print the new value of sum, which is 1, to the console. And we go back to the for loop header and increment our control variable. Now I has the value of 2. We loop again and add the value of sum to the value of I, which is now 1 plus 2. We assign this value to the variable sum, giving sum the value of 3. and then print the new value of sum to the console. We continue this and repeat this loop for when I has the values of 3, 4, and 5. This will give us the final value of 15 for the sum. All right, now that you know about for loops in Lua, it's your turn to use them in your programs.